Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As we are running short of time, as we write in the beginning of introduction, that makes my work very easy because I can be miser in discussing this difficult topic. And the thank for telling me in the beginning that yes, I have got that premium to speak less. When President of Hyderabad chapter of ACFE and my good friend and my old friend Sharath told me that I have to address this conference on the topic of ethics, I thought he was pulling a fast one. Perhaps the joke of the century. Because to tell a cop to talk about ethics is something ironical. There is a priori cognitive dissonance. Because cop is supposed to be unethical every time. Even today when I was, as per my habit, I was perusing my Twitter account, I was surprised that at least 50% of the Twitter account which I follow were about police atrocities, unethical behavior of police. Again, I felt that I am perhaps the most unfit candidate for this session. But then I have gathered courage and I will try to make most of what I can do, despite the cognitive dissonance, despite the ironical situation of cop talking about ethics. Frauds are fact of life these days. Why these days? I would say since the society started knowing the benefits of profiteering, frauds have started since then. Today the dimension is very large. The other day there was a government account that about 4 lakh crore frauds have been detected during last 3 years. And to my mind that is only tip of iceberg. Those are only detected frauds. When the RBI report, talks about over 1.5 crore, 5 lakh crore bank frauds continuously for last 2 financial years. And it has grown. It was perhaps less than 1 lakh crore couple of years back. It is growing, and it is growing exponentially. Now, this exponential word, I feel that it is a historic word. It is a hackneyed word. Now the modern word is it's exploding like a COVID. And it's not literal, it's metaphoric also, because it is such a virus that when it affects anybody, it doesn't go away easily. And it spreads, it's contagious. So, the dimension of fraud has been growing exponentially. As I said, that frauds have been ever since man, society. This is not coming there. This is not being displayed. Yeah, now. Frauds were committed by mankind, by humans, ever since they learnt about profiteering or money. The earliest recorded fraud dates back to 300 before Common Era. 300 BC before Common Era, when a Greek merchant named Hegestaros took out a large insurance policy known as bottomry. The merchant borrowed money and agreed to pay it back with interest when the cargo of corn was delivered. If the merchant refused to pay back the loan, the lender could claim the cargo and the boat used for the transportation. Hegestaros planned to sink the empty boat and keep the loan and sell the corn. Now, this is the earliest historical recorded fraud. However, the plan failed because when he was trying to sink the boat, his fellow crewmen killed him. They found out about the plan and they killed him. But my point is that this fraud is nothing new. It has been in human psyche since long time. Then come to 193 AD. I'm just talking about some recorded, some known and some recorded events of fraud. It doesn't mean that nothing happened between 300 BC and 193 AD. Things would have happened. Now 193 AD, this was the Bunty and Bubbly of that era. You have seen Bunty and Bubbly movie. The couple, the Khan couple tried to sell Taj Mahal. In this case, the Roman Empire was sold. It was the first ever incident of financial fraud after Common Era. The Praetorian Guard were an elite group of loyal soldiers who protected the emperor. At the time, he was Petrinax. Petrinax was assassinated by so-called loyal bodyguards. The guards then announced that the throne of the Roman Empire was to be sold to a man who would pay the highest price. Julianus, with an astronomical bid of 200 pieces of gold for every soldier in the army, that was equivalent to around £1 billion today, bought the throne and thus the Roman Empire. The guards sold something that did not belong to them and effectively committing a fraud. Now this is why I am trying to highlight all these incidents, historical facts, is to later discuss about the importance of rationalization, what President talked. A very important component of the fraud triangle. You all know about the fraud triangle, I need not repeat those. Charles Ponzi, 1920, who became a legend and now because of his name, it has become a tag name for the scam, Ponzi scam we all know. Charles Ponzi discovered that he could purchase postal vouchers in his home country, ship them abroad and make modest 5% profit. However, when selling to investor, he exaggerated his margin, promising 50% profit return. Here also we find such kind of selling, like teak wood plantation selling. Sometimes in real estate, even I was told, I must confess, I was told a 21% return on some investment in real estate, which I thought was something staggering and impossible. But then gullible customers, gullible purchasers, they would believe 21% return as something I would never forego if it is genuine. But prima facie, it appears to be wrong. It appears to be fraud. So what I said, the similar promise was made by Ponzi, that he promised a profit of 50% on return of 5% what she was getting. Ponzi paid his earlier investors back with money from his new, more recent ones. The same trick with Sarda scam. Even Sahara. They committed they used same tricks. When a scam was finally discovered, Ponzi had made $10 million and he fled the country. Come back to 21st century. We are starting for 300 BC. Come to 21st century, nothing has changed. Only method has changed. But then the basic aspect of inclination, opportunity and rationalization, the key components of frauds, they are common in all these incidents which we are trying to discuss. Enron became embodiment of the corporate greed, white-collar theft. The energy giant's top brass orchestrated a massive wave of accounting designed to inflate profits, conceal debts, and fool investors. Same technique was used by Satyam. The WorldCom, technological giant, filed a bankruptcy in 2002. When his auditor was arrested, they also had the same technique of inflating income and cash flow. Now these kind of frauds are being perpetrated since ages. But basic underlying, these are techniques, these are tactics. What we are discussing only tactics, but why these tactics are important? Because each tactics has been rationalized. There has been, something has been given as an explanation for indulging in this kind of fraudulent activities. But before we understand, before we make an allegation, before we try to understand why these are frauds, let us look at the definition of fraud. Fraud is a knowing misrepresentation of truth. It is a knowing misrepresentation of truth when accounts are falsified, when incomes are inflated, when profits are shown in a different manner. It is also concealment of material fact to induce another. When Ponzi says that he will give 50% profit on investment, he is trying to conceal material fact that it is not possible. When a teak plantation person wants to say that the return would be so much, or when the fellow told me that he will give me 21% return on a real estate investment, he is trying to conceal the material fact and to induce me. For what? To act in a manner which is at detriment to my own interests. That is very important. Any act which is done with a view, which results in a negative impact to the receiver to which the idea was sold, to whom the idea was sold. Now you say Bahubali if you consider in the first Bahubali, when he lifts a massive boulder and throws, he is concealing a material fact that it is not a boulder, it is a thermocol. He is misrepresenting the truth. But it is not a fraud because it is not acting to the detriment of the other person who is witnessing it. So the major consideration in fraud, to my mind, of course, these actions of misrepresentation and concealment of fact should be there. But the consequence of that, if it is harmful to the receiver, harmful to the person who has sold, harmful to the person who has invested, then it becomes a definition, then it becomes the definition of fraud. Bahubali has not committed a fraud, despite the fact that he misrepresented the fact of lifting a thermocol ball as a massive boulder, because it was not detriment to the audience. They enjoyed. And they enjoyed and they went back home happy. They didn't lose anything. In fact, their quality of life was improved for that act of misrepresentation of fact. So I am trying to impress this thing that a fraud should result in some loss to the person, some loss to the person who is at the receiving end. Mariam Hussain has delineated three categories of person who generally indulge in frauds. These are personality types: dominant, flamboyant, and charismatic. Now, if you look at the common theme on these personality characteristics, it is only the ability to rationalize. A dominant person rationalizes by sheer force of his position. A flamboyant person rationalizes because he shows the outcomes, great outcomes of his action. And the charismatic, of course, he has ability to rationalize everything, explain everything. Now, if we look at the personality profile of all those whom I have mentioned, but I do not think that they strictly fit into these three categories. There are some approximation here and there. There may be some overflow also from one category to another category. But the fact is that there is a dominance of rationalization trait, which there is a preponderance of particular rationalization traits that makes them that could enable fixing them in particular category. Bernard Ebbers, the WorldCom chief, he grew up in a very difficult situation. He lived a life in drudgery. But he was motivated. It compelled him to do something new. He was a man with a drive. An expert in making multi-million-dollar deals. In 1997, he merged his company with MCI Communication with approximate cost of $40 billion. At time it was considered to be the largest merger in business history. It was considered as a daring move. The merger shocked observers in the business world. When the offer was made, MCI was 4 times bigger than WorldCom. That gave credibility to Bernard Ebbers. He was characterized as a swashbuckling deal maker. He made another acquisition in 1999 and bought Sprint Corporation for $129 billion. He was dominant. He was flamboyant too. The deal which he made for Sprint, with Sprint, was struck while he was riding a horse. Such was a kind of such was a flamboyance. But his dominance and flamboyance, perhaps, was the cause for his rationalization that led to the fraud. Enron's story is same. Kenneth Lee, he grew up in poverty after his family store failed. But he was a go-getter. He had several associations with government and politics also. He was close to George Bush family. But again, maybe this overconfidence caused him to indulge in financial fraud. They are all go-getters, they are all men driven by passion, driven to do something great, born in drudgery or poverty. But what is the missing link? The missing link is only one, which I introduce as a theme of my topic, theme of the topic given to me. The missing link was ethics. I am not going to deal about Ramalinga Raju or Vijay Mallya, or they are in the folklores of fraud investigators. But judge them on the dimension of their flamboyance, their personality characteristics of flamboyance, their ability to rationalize, and lack of ethics in their conduct. Sudipto Sen of Sardha, I read somewhere, perhaps one of the net, this thing, I don't recollect, but maybe if I find it again, I will circulate it to you, that the website was, there was no, his photo was not there on the website of the Sardha company. And the president's statement was something given as a bubble. Now that is something which a charismatic person would like to do. People fell, because, of course, I mean, I should not talk about it, whether there are several political angles also, but the thing is that political angles are only a part of rationalization. The major part is that they all have faulted on the ground of ethics. Charles Ponzi, again, Yeah, we have discussed about Charles Ponzi, how he flouted ethics by telling somebody that a 5% he will give a return of 50%. He was charismatic because people bought his idea. He could sell his idea. So the thing is that despite people being dynamic, despite people having positive personality characteristics, though it may sound derogatory to have a dominant, flamboyant or charismatic personality, but come to think of it, they are positive aspects of personalities. The only thing common thread in all these individuals or in all these personality types is that they lacked in ethics. Why I am trying to emphasize the question of ethics in fraud prevention and fraud control. Fraud control, fraud prevention and fraud detection. My emphasis is based on a study by ACFE. You might have seen all this document. This is a report to nations 2020. In that, let's look at the first four. Is it visible there? Yeah. Yeah. First four types, first four types of controls which led to reduction in frauds. All are above 50%. But code of conduct number one, marginally higher, 51%. Now the another aspect to be noticed is that internal audit, management certification, external audit and management review. These are all post-fraud detection mechanism. Whereas code of conduct is a pre-fraud detection instrument. So, the point is that effective implementation, effective code of conduct leads to a better pre-fraud prevention. It is a preventive mechanism. There is a symbiotic relationship or important relationship between code of ethics and code of conduct. While code of ethics is a strategy, code of conduct is the code of conduct tells us how the ethical steps are to be implemented. Well, ethics is a principle. You will always be honest. You will not tell lies. You will not deceive people. These are ethical principles. These are ethical strategies. But how do we implement it? How do we ensure that it is implemented? Code of conduct gives us the steps through which it is implemented. And it is ensured to be implemented. Thomas Shanks and others have written a research paper in which they have delineated two aspects of ethics. One is that it is universal, well-founded standards of right and wrong that humans should do. Don't tell lies. Don't deceive. Don't hurt anybody. Respect women. Respect children. Respect elders. These are ethical principles. These are well-founded standards of right and wrong. They tell obligations also. And ethics also means a continuous effort to evolve, because situation is dynamic. So ethics should be always dynamic. The method should be there to fit in the evolving situation. The example is that of a plumber and an engineer. A plumber would only know that if you have to make the water flow, a liquid flow, you should fix a pipe in such a manner that the source is the higher end and the tap is at the lower end. That is the only principle he knows. But an engineer would simply try to devise the system or lay the pipe based on the viscosity of the liquid, based on the temperature through which the liquid flows, the pressure, and all these other environmental ingredients are to be taken into consideration. Similarly, in ethics, it is something like a work of an engineer, that he would consider the entire environmental factor which should be taken into account while devising code of conduct, which is implementable. These are important because, as we have discussed, and there is an empirical evidence that code of conduct helps in prevention of financial frauds. There are different aspects of ethics which are translated into code of conduct. A code of conduct is a working guide. It is not a technical document. The first point is that the code of conduct is a working guide and it's not a legal document. The observance of the code is based on common sense. It is therefore important that it would ensure nearly full compliance, because if it is based on common sense, if it is not contrived, then it makes easy to comprehend, makes easy to comply. The funniest part, is that if you make something which is common sense, but then you make it as a rigid regime, then it becomes difficult. For some, it becomes difficult to comply. Now, I'll tell you my personal example which we faced. Normally, it's normal. Common sense means normal activity, normal perception, normal all those things. Now, it's normal, and I'm citing my example as a cop and training example of training during my stay in National Police Academy. It's normal that whenever we walk, left leg and right hand come forward together. It is normal. Nothing, you watch, it's common. Left leg, right leg, left hand. It's normal. When it is told on the ground that, look, you have to walk like this, most of us, first time, had right leg, right hand, left leg, left hand. So, even the common sense thing has to be told in a manner that it is perceived as a normal thing, not as something extraordinary. So, code of ethics has to be simple language, simple understanding, and simple perception. why it is necessary to have a code of ethics written when it is common sense? We can say that, look, I mean, you should not tell truth. I mean, should not tell lies. Always speak truth. Now the matter ends there. But then, why? Why should we have code of ethics? It is specific guidelines which we need to practice. And it gets ingrained into your action. Now, the dimensions of ethics is that we should promote fair competition. Unless we promote fair competition, unless we indulge in activities which allows others to grow in a competitive manner, there is a tendency that a sense of omnipotence will arise, and then that would lead to fraudulent behavior. And then these ethical behavior, these code of conduct should always revolve around the competition based on quality, service and price. Not to conduct any affairs dishonestly, to conduct them directly and fairly, to comply with antitrust laws. Now, ethics has three components, as we can see. The first component is idealism, like Satyam Vada, always states truth. These are idealism. Always be good to people, idealism. Be democratic in your conduct, idealism. Then there is other aspect, that is legalism, that you follow laws. Laws of the land, laws of your company. And the third aspect is consequentialism. What happens to your act if it is at the detriment of others, or it is for the benefit of others? So the code of conduct should have all these three components. When we said that there should be a fair competition, there should be adherence to law, compliance to law and regulatory practices. There should be compliance to corrupt practices acts. Not only of the law of the land, I mean, if the company is dealing with the foreign countries or the foreign companies, even the foreign corruption acts of those countries should be complied with. Conflict of interest is one thing where ethical consideration becomes more important. Generally, in our country, acceptance of gift is not considered bad. It is acceptable. We rationalize. Arey, Diwali mein gift laya. I mean, that's the holiday. I mean, festival. Eid ka gift hai. That's festival. I mean, any festival we should accept. I mean, presenting gift is not a crime. And accepting also is not a crime. But what is there in the gift? And who is giving the gift? If a supplier is giving the gift, if presenting those gifts, the quantum and quantity of the gift, the quality of the gift. I have seen gifts on Diwali wherein gold bars were gifted. I mean, these are not gifts. These are instrument of corruption. A pack of sweets in Diwali is good enough, I can understand. But a pack of sweets with a bar of gold is not a gift per se. Pardon? Value. So the thing is that the quality, quantity, and the person who is presenting, that is important to examine conflict of interest. And then the funniest part is that the people who got, they thought that they are big, because not only sweet, they got even gold bar with the sweet. I mean, they are big. They rationalized. Because of their stature they are getting, they didn't see it as a conflict of interest. It happens everywhere. Whether a code of conduct, a code of ethics would examine these qualitative aspects of gift. In that context, we have to define who is, quote and quote, a person who can have conflict of interest, person who is a supplier, person who is there to extract something out of the person to whom the gift was presented. As a friend, if I present a gift, there is no conflict of interest. But certainly in that I will be cautious, because it is presenting a gift is based on the principle of reciprocity. That is very important. Presenting a gift is based on principle of reciprocity. None of us want to die in debt, whether it is a material debt, whether it is a moral debt. None of us. And that is why, if somebody offers me a cup of tea, next time I also try to offer him a cup of tea. Sometimes if somebody opens a door for me, I will also try to reciprocate by offering a door for him if I am in that position, or if I am in that sequence. So a normal gift is based on the principle of reciprocity. So presenting a gift to a friend would always, because I know that he will try to return my gift. And then he should be in a position to return that. He should not get obliged. So why I am trying to emphasize all these details is that why accepting gift not only source, but quality, quantum, and quantity of gift is also, and even frequency. Frequency of gift is also important. Unethical behavior in a factory, in a company, or in any organization would call for reporting gift. Suppose I have got a gift, I must report to my immediate superior, my supervising officers. Another dimension of code of conduct or ethical behavior is that not to seek employment outside the present employing company or present employer. Now that will automatically give rise to conflict of interest of different kind. I have already talked about the relationship between suppliers and customers, and in the context of gifts and considerations like that. Employment of relative, obviously, it's something which is a common sense, that you will not canvass or you will not do anything for employment of relatives unless the person is competent to hold that position. Protection of confidential information is a dimension of ethical behavior. Some may try to use this information to harm the company or use it for their personal benefit. That information should be guarded by the person who is holding it. And the critical information includes everything: technical, business, financial. which is the property of the company. It should not. The thumb rule is that any information which has not been made public is a confidential information. That is a thumb rule. Under that thumb rule, ethical code of conduct would call for protecting that information that is not public. Classified national security information, it is again a common sense that it will not only cause loss to this kind of fraud resulting from misuse of classified national security information would not only result in loss to the company but loss to the nation. Cash and bank accounts should be handled in such a manner to exclude the possibility of impropriety. Now, these again are common sense aspects, but it has to be defined in code of ethics to minimize the chances of rationalization. The entire effort in making ethics as a tool of fraud prevention is that it should be used and it should be quantified. And in fact, the common sense should be quantified in a manner that it becomes a guiding force, a guiding factor. So this common sense that there should not be financial impropriety, it's a common sense. But a code of conduct has to define this, because ultimately in the end we need to have a mechanism of compliance, whether this thing was done, whether this thing was not done. There should be an audit of ethical behavior also. Now that audit cannot be done unless we have defined steps. The other day we were discussing about authorizations of data. We can give permissions, but then there should be audit whether that permission was judicially used or somebody used it inappropriately. So these things are to be defined in a manner that a compliance system is created which can be audited later. There should be defined procedures for company assets and transactions. Compliance with prescribed accounting procedure is required all the times. Employees having control over company asset and transactions are expected to handle them with the strictest integrity and ensure that all transactions are executed in accordance with management's authorization. The authorization, as I talked. All transactions should be accurately and fairly recorded in reasonable details in company's accounting records. Employees are personally accountable for company fund over which they have control. Now, these steps, a guiding principle, should become a compliance matter if we want to enforce ethics to minimize rationalization. Not rationality, I'm sorry, rationality should always be there, but not rationalization. Only? Sorry, then I'll rush. Thank you. So these are the steps which I think are self-explanatory. The underlying principle I have already explained. Political contributions, that there should be transparency in that, because we have seen the case of Enrons, how they exploited political connection, how not exploited, how rationalization on political considerations helped their action, helped rationalization. Conduct of reporting violation and discipline, these are all rational matters. In the end, I'll say a quote from Forbes. It says, "Success will come and go, but integrity is forever." Now that is the ultimate ethical consideration. If that can be drilled into each and every employee, right from the top, I mean, top is not excluded. I think top, it is the fount of all actions, and it should be drilled and it should be practiced by them. That integrity is something which gives company a name, not the money and profit. And success, this money will come, money flow will keep and in whatever manner and continuously with some highs and lows. There is no high and low of integrity, either it is high or it is low forever. Lastly, I quote from Niti Shatakam of Bhartrhari. The verse 74 says that those are the noblest person who, giving up self-interest, bring about good of others. Those that undertake a business for sake of others, not inconsistent with their own good, are the exalted lot. Those who harm the welfare of others for their own selfish interest are demons in human form. We know not what to call those who harm others' welfare for no purpose at all. This is the ethics of this is the, I think, the best definition of ethics I could ever get hold of. It is applicable in every field, and it is, I would say, that should be the guiding principle of any organization, and it would definitely lead to fraud prevention. Thank you. Thank you very much.